In 1961, miners chiseled into a hillside in Morocco and stumbled upon something remarkable. A human skull was embedded in solid rock. The site, known as Jebel Irhoud, about 100 kilometers west of Marrakesh, was being quarried for barite ore when this skull surfaced. One miner pried the skull from the cave wall and, as the story goes, he initially kept it as a souvenir before eventually turning it over to scientists. This chance discovery sparked a joint French-Moroccan expedition led by anthropologist Émile Anouchi, making Jebel Irhoud an unexpected hotspot for paleoanthropology. Anouchi's team began excavations later that year, and they had to blast away nearly 2,000 tons of debris with small explosives in order to reach the buried cave sediments. As they dug into the Pleistocene layers, the researchers unearthed more fossils in a trove of animal bones and stone tools. The human remains found in the 1960s came to be cataloged as Irhoud 1, 2, 3, and so on, including portions of skulls, a child's jawbone, and limb bones from at least 3 individuals. Notably, the stone artifacts scattered across these bones were crafted in the Middle Stone Age style, using the distinctive Levallois flake technique, a way of shaping the stone cores to produce sharper flakes. To archaeologists of the time, Levallois tools and the cave's primitive-looking skull fragments seemed reminiscent of European Neanderthals, so the Jebel Irhoud people were initially assumed to be North African Neanderthals who lived around 40,000 years ago. That early interpretation, however, didn't sit well with the fossil evidence. Even as the site was first studied, researchers noticed puzzling contradictions. The Jebel Irhoud skulls had some features that didn't match Neanderthals, looking in certain ways more like modern humans. And when Anouchi's team tried to date the fossils using radiocarbon, the results only told them that the remains were older than 50,000 years, which is too old for radiocarbon to measure. Radiocarbon dating can only go back 50,000 years, so this site was at least more ancient than everyone was expecting. Still, for decades, the site remained something of a mystery. Later excavations in 1967 and 69 by Tixier and colleagues uncovered additional bone fragments, Irhoud 4 and 5, and these were found within clearer context, and by the 1980s, some researchers had begun to suspect that these were not Neanderthals at all, but rather early Homo sapiens. But the exact age was still an open question. Initial estimates in the 1980s and 90s cautiously put the site at around 160,000 years old, roughly on par with known early Homo sapien fossils in East Africa. Even so, the Irhoud fossils looked oddly primitive compared to those East African remains, leaving anthropologists scratching their heads over how these Moroccan people fit into the human family tree. For years, Jebel Irhoud's true significance lurked in the background of human origins research. Every student of paleoanthropology learned about the site. Jean-Jacques Hublin, a French paleoanthropologist, recalls first hearing of Jebel Irhoud early in his career and being intrigued by a, quote, human lower jawbone that just made no sense. These fossils were an enigma. They had a mix of modern and archaic traits, and came from a region largely neglected in discussions of our species' origins. The prevailing view for decades was that modern humans, Homo sapiens, arose in a kind of Garden of Eden in East Africa roughly 200,000 years ago, before dispersing elsewhere. A few fossil clues and genetic hints had suggested a deeper, more complicated story, like the partial skull from Florisbad, South Africa, hinting at Homo sapien-like features around 260,000 years ago. But hard evidence was sparse. Jebel Irhoud, it seemed, held crucial pieces of that puzzle, if only someone could properly date and interpret the site. Hublin was determined to resolve the mystery. In 2004, he finally got his chance. Together with Moroccan authorities and an international team, he organized a new excavation campaign, and given that the original cave had been partially destroyed by mining, the team first had to rebuild a road to that area and remove heaps of rubble dumped on the site. Slowly and carefully, they dug into what remained of the cave sediments, and to their delight, part of the archaeological deposit had survived untouched beneath the mine debris. As the excavators sifted through layer after layer of reddish sediment, history began to resurface. They found dozens of stone tools, spear points and flakes, some still showing the telltale char of having been in a fire. They found ample charcoal and ash, evidence that these ancient people controlled fire and cooked in their dwelling. And importantly, they found human remains. Hublin's renewed excavation unearthed 20 new hominin fossils, including parts of at least 5 individuals. Among these were a nearly complete adult lower jaw and portions of a skull, exactly the pieces needed to compare the Jebel Irhoud people to other early humans. Crucially, these fossils were found in clear context alongside the stone tools and animal bones, all within the same sediment layer. This meant that, for the first time, scientists could reliably date Jebel Irhoud's precious bones by dating the artifacts and sediments around them. Determining the age of these fossils was a scientific challenge decades in the making, and in 2007, a tentative date of about 160,000 years was obtained using a technique called electron spin resonance, or ESR, applied to one of the original bones. But doubts persisted about that number. The 2004 to 2011 excavations gave researchers new material and a fresh opportunity to pin down the site's age with better precision. The key turned out to be the flint tools. Many of the stone tools had been heated in ancient campfires, effectively resetting their internal clocks. Because when a flint tool is burned, it loses any trapped electrons it had accumulated over time, erasing its previous radiation exposure. After it cools and is buried again, it starts accumulating a fresh charge from natural background radiation in the soil. By measuring the current electric charge in the tools and the radiation in the surrounding sediment, geochronologists Daniel Richter and colleagues could calculate how long it had been since these flints were last heated by those prehistoric people's fires. Richter and his team spent a year meticulously measuring the radiation dose at Jebel Irhoud and analyzing the burned tools using thermoluminescence dating. The result was stunning. The tools, and by association the human fossils in that same layer, had been buried about 315,000 years ago, give or take 30,000 years. As Richter put it, quote, "Well-dated sites of this age are exceptionally rare in Africa, but we were fortunate that so many of the Jebel Irhoud flint artifacts had been heated in the past, which made this thermoluminescence dating possible." To cross-check these findings, the team also recalculated the age of that Irhoud 3 jawbone using improved ESR techniques. The revised age for the jaw came out to roughly 386,000 years, consistent with the thermoluminescence dates, and much older than previously realized for this fossil. In short, all lines of evidence converged. The Jebel Irhoud people lived around 300,000 years ago. This age was twice as old as researchers had thought based on earlier estimates. As science writer Kate Wong quipped, "The Moroccan fossils mess up the tidy story of human evolution origins that had prevailed for so long." Up until 2017, the oldest widely accepted fossils of Homo sapiens were from Omo Kabish in Ethiopia, around 195,000 years old, and Herto, Ethiopia, about 160,000 years. Quote, "Remains from Morocco dated to 315,000 years ago push our species' origins by 100,000 years, and suggest we didn't evolve only in East Africa," as one Nature news headline summarized. The finding filled in a crucial gap in the fossil record. It meant that humans who looked something like us were walking around North Africa far earlier than anyone dared to imagine. When Hublin's team analyzed the anatomy of the new fossils, they were struck by how modern these ancient people looked, at least in some respects. The team created a composite recomposition of a Jebel Irhoud skull by digitally piecing together scans of various bone fragments. What emerged was a visage that was surprisingly familiar. Quote, "The face is the face of somebody you could cross in the metro," Hublin says. They're described as having flat, delicate faces with small cheekbones and even a hint of a chin, much like modern Homo sapiens. Their teeth, too, fall within the size and shape range of those humans alive today. In fact, when researchers quantitatively compare the Irhoud facial bones and teeth to other human species, they found a clear alignment with Homo sapiens rather than Neanderthals or earlier humans. But not all of their anatomy was modern. While the face and dental traits could, quote, "fall within the variation of humans living today," the brain case told a different story. The Moroccan skulls have an elongated, slightly flattened brain case, a shape more typical of archaic humans from the Middle Pleistocene era. In modern humans, by contrast, the skull tends to be globular, round and high-domed at the back, reflecting a differently shaped brain. The Irhoud crania lacks that globular shape. Their brain cases are long and low, more like those of earlier humans like Homo heidelbergensis or even Neanderthals. And so these fossils suggest a scenario where, quote, "modern human facial morphology was established early on in the history of our species, and that brain shape, and possibly brain function, evolved with the Homo sapien lineage." In other words, these people likely looked much like us from the front, but the back part of their skulls housed a brain that may be organized a bit differently. Hublin describes the Irhoud fossils as representing, quote, "the very root of our species, the oldest Homo sapiens ever found in Africa or elsewhere." a population that, quote, lacked some of our hallmark traits, but whose anatomical form could have gradually evolved into our modern one. Scientists even note subtle differences in their jaws compared to ours. One thing conspicuously absent is a bony chin. Modern humans are the only hominins to have that prominent chin on the lower jaw. Neanderthals and other archaic humans typically do not. The Irhoud mandibles are much more delicate than a Neanderthal's, but don't show a full chin prominence either. And so this mosaic of features raise the question, should these fossils be called Homo sapiens at all? Or are they a closely related archaic species? Hublin's team firmly classifies them as early Homo sapiens, given the clear modern aspects of the face and teeth. Nonetheless, the mix of traits shows that anatomically modern humans did not appear overnight with all their features in place. As of course, these neat distinctions on a timeline are just for us. Evolution works in a gradual process. In a way, every living thing can be seen as transitional. Beyond the bones, Jebel Irhoud offers a new window into the lives of these distant relatives. The cave deposits held a rich assembly of animal remains, which zoo archaeologists have studied to infer hunting and diet. The most common species in the fauna is gazelle, suggesting these early humans hunted gazelles on the open plains. Other bones found include those of wildebeest, zebra, and even small game, indicating a broad diet of savanna animals, as well as possibly gathering plant foods, though plant remains rarely preserve. Cut marks on animal bones and evidence of controlled fire hint that Irhoud people butchered their kills and cooked their meat over hearths. The technology at Jebel Irhoud is firmly of the Middle Stone Age, which is the era in Africa corresponding to roughly 300,000 to 50,000 years ago, and their toolkits are surprisingly sophisticated. Hublin's team found plentiful flint artifacts, including pointed flakes likely used as spear tips and cutting tools, and that level wall technique used is associated with both early modern humans in Africa and Neanderthals in Europe and Asia, indicating a broadly shared technical innovation of the Middle Paleolithic. Notably, some types of tools common in early periods are absent, like hand axes, which are a signature tool of the earlier Acheulean culture, and these are nowhere to be found in Jebel Irhoud. This confirms that by 300,000 years ago, humans in Africa had moved beyond the Acheulean toolkit and were innovating new ways to produce sharp tools. Many of the flints at Irhoud were made from high-quality raw materials that was imported from elsewhere, implying these people ranged across the landscape or even traded to obtain good stone. Shannon McFerrin, an archaeologist on Hublin's team, noted how familiar these tools appear. Quote, "The stone artifacts from Jebel Irhoud look very similar to ones from deposits of a similar age in East Africa and in Southern Africa." And it's true that roughly 300,000-year-old sites in Kenya, Ethiopia, and South Africa have yielded comparable Middle Stone Age toolkits. This suggests that a set of technological innovations, making points using level wall flaking, and likely the regular use of fire, had spread across much of Africa by this time. McFerrin and colleagues believe these advances may be linked to the emergence of Homo sapiens itself. Better tools and new hunting strategies could have allowed early human groups to thrive in diverse environments and disperse across Africa. Interestingly, that period around 300,000 years ago corresponds to a phase when the Sahara was not the extreme desert it is today. Paleoclimate data indicate a green Sahara cycle, a wetter phase where grasslands and lakes extended across what are now arid dunes. Hublin's team pointed out that during such times, North Africa would have been more hospitable and connected to sub-Saharan Africa, potentially serving as a corridor for widespread human populations. In fact, Hublin suggests that by around 300,000 years ago, quote, "there was a dispersal of our species, or at least the most primitive version of our species, throughout Africa." And so the implications of this site are profound. It captures a moment in time where people who were almost modern humans were living in the far northwest corner of Africa, using fire and sophisticated tools to adapt to their environment. They were hunting, foraging, and perhaps roaming over wide territories, right along the Mediterranean and near the Straits of Gibraltar, which scientists think were already being navigated by seafaring hominids that came before us. And this site has updated the view of what a cradle of humanity even looks like. As Hublin says, quote, "We used to think that there was a cradle of mankind 200,000 years ago in East Africa, but our new data reveals that Homo sapiens spread across the entire African continent around 300,000 years ago. Long before the out-of-Africa dispersal of Homo sapiens, there was a dispersal within Africa." This notion of a pan-African origin is one of the most important shifts in thinking to come out of Jebel Irhoud. And the Moroccan fossils don't stand alone in reshaping this view. In South Africa, for instance, the Florisbad skull, dating to around 260,000 years ago, has been reinterpreted as early Homo sapiens or a close relative. And in East Africa, the Homo kabish fossils, long the record holders for the oldest modern humans, were recently redated to at least 233,000 years old using volcanic ash layers. Genetic studies, too, support a deeper timeline. Analysis of DNA from African populations suggests our ancestors may have diversified as early as 250,000 to 300,000 years ago. All of this taken together means the lines of evidence paint a picture of a complex evolutionary history with multiple populations of early humans scattered across Africa, periodically mixing and moving. The idea that modern human traits emerged in a patchwork fashion across a large geographic area is gaining ground. Different pieces of what make us, our anatomy, our behaviors, our technologies, may have evolved in different African populations and then come together through gene flow and migration. Jebel Irhoud's mix of modern and archaic features exemplifies that braid, and it cannot be stressed enough that these clear lines between species are more useful for categorization than they are at describing how the world actually works. Many hominins were interbreeding with each other, and everything is showing that even within Africa, there are significantly different populations of what we still call Homo sapiens, as local pressures like environmental differences and the hominins found in different areas are all creating these unique offspring over time. And I do want to highlight some of the debate on these findings. Quote, if the small face and the shape of the lower jaw are the key traits of modern humans, then the Jebel Irhoud remains could be a form of our ancestors, says Marta Mirazon-Lar, a paleoanthropologist at Cambridge, adding that this would, quote, shift the focus of scientists to study modern human origins from sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean. But some researchers urge caution in our definitions. Quote, these papers are going a step too far, I think, paleoanthropologist John Hawkes opined at the time, regarding these reports in Nature. Quote, they redefine the concept of Homo sapiens by creating this category of early modern humans that I've never seen before. Hawkes and others point out that if one defines Homo sapiens strictly by features like a tall, rounded skull and a chin, then the Jebel Irhoud fossils might fall just outside the mark. The Irhoud crania, quote, do not possess some of the key morphological features that define our species, noted Aureline Monir, a paleoanthropologist who weighed in on a 2022 study. They lack the globular brain vault and pronounced chin seen in unquestionably modern specimens like Homo kabish. For that reason, some experts prefer to call them Irhoud hominins, or proto-modern, an archaic branch closely related to modern humans, rather than modern humans outright. Quote, the main skull looks like something that could be near the root of the sapiens lineage, observed paleoanthropologist Richard Klein. Quote, I'd consider them proto-modern, not modern. The debate is healthy. It forces scientists to grapple with how to define our species. Are we defined by a suite of cranial features, by genetics, by behavior and tools? It's a continuum, and Jebel Irhoud sits very early on the Homo sapiens branch of the family tree. Whether we call them fully modern humans or not, their presence means humans with a lot of modern traits were already widespread in Africa a third of a million years ago. Quote, 300,000 years ago there was fossil evidence of a population that in a remarkable number of ways resembles modern humans, and you can make of that what you like, says Bernard Wood. You can either expand the definition of Homo sapiens to include them, or say these were creatures that were on their way to becoming modern humans. And like I said before, people seem to confuse this a lot with evolution, and forget that a lot of similar species can interbreed with each other, and even have viable offspring. Calling different hominin groups different species, while technically correct and useful, does not have the same connotation that a lot of people are coming away with. Almost all humans on Earth have part of their DNA that was mixed with other hominin species. It's likely that all of the hominin tree was breeding with some other branch at some point in time. And all of their changes would have came about gradually. And so what is the legacy of Jebel Irhoud? Well, it reminds us that our species did not spring fully formed from one locale at one time. Instead, human evolution was a gradual, diffuse process, one that unfolded across an entire continent and then the entire world. The Moroccan fossils, with their mix of familiar faces and primitive skulls, encapsulate this moment of evolutional transition, producing the features that would eventually become standard in modern humans. Far from a tidy, linear progression, the emergence of modern humans now appears to be a combination of traits and cultures, all flowing together from various regions of Africa. And this flow has been occurring for millions of years, as even older hominids went out of Africa and back in, all intermixing at different times, encountering new hominins coming out of Africa again, creating unique pockets of slightly different people each time. In one grand evolutionary process that has its roots in billions of years ago, and hopefully will continue on for billions more.